All right. So 1.09, it's another short chapter um, in Unit 1, and it's specifying where. It's just going to build on the one we did a few chapters ago on drawing shapes in the air. And again, I'll post it. So the goal is to look at how do we use this vertical plane of space to illustrate. It'll become really important when we're describing like towns, or if we're describing a building, and on this level is this, and this level is this, and this level is this. We do lots of vertical things like that. I don't know if I mentioned family trees are something that gets brought up in the book as an interesting way of just describing that, but it's not really much of a fad anymore to talk about one's family tree. It used to be much more important in deaf culture because people would deaf residential schools, which I'll talk about in detail later, were very much a cultural hub where deaf students weren't mainstreamed. They went to a deaf school, and almost every state had at least one. So that was networking within the deaf community, within deaf culture. So people would say, "Oh, which school did you go to?" And the sign for school is this. It's not in the vocab here, but I'll teach it while I'm teaching this. 2 flat hands, just clap together. And school for the deaf is with the letter I, because most of them were called the New York State Institute for the Deaf or something like that. So they would always ask, "What school did you go to?" "Oh, did you know this person? My cousin went to this school," and that was sort of networking. So it was really huge part of deaf culture. It's a little bit less so with so many students since the 70s being mainstreamed. Gradually that number has shifted. Now, most deaf students are actually mainstreamed with hearing students. Very few actually still go to the schools for the deaf, which is unfortunate for many reasons, and we'll talk about that later. Anyway, right now we're talking about shapes and locations. So we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we're going to trace the shapes. If it's an irregular shape, you've got a reference point, and then everything comes off of it. Circles, again, so we know it's a round circle as opposed to like an oval or like a heart. And here's where I want you to start noticing that in regular hearing speaking culture, we use gestures to supplement our words. They're general. They don't really have a specific meaning. Come here, go away. It's not like, boom, come right here. The old Cyrano, he goes, bring him here now. Something like that. So those kind of things where they're very specific. Gestures are generally just generic, unspecific movements, where signs tend to be very specific. So that's why we're going to be looking at placement and how we illustrate that. So we know these basic symbols. If it's symmetrical, both hands can go in unison or in mirror image of each other. Diamond, heart, star, right? Okay. And even like an oval. So we've done all those, and any orientation of those, any kind of shape, even if it's like, Christmas tree, then you can do them together. If it's going to be uneven, you're going to want to do reference point and then trace the outline. Now, how do we put something in the middle of it or somewhere around it? Start with something simple like a stop sign. So first, draw the shape. And then in the middle is where we're going to go. Now, instinctually, we're going to use our right hand to point because we're going right there, right? But we're about to finger spell with this hand, S-T-O-P, right? So what we want to do is you want to draw the shape, and then with your passive hand, with the support hand, point to the middle. So we're going to, in here, eyebrows up is like, okay, now I'm going to set up a new topic, and then S-T-O-P. Okay. So that's the most clear. So And we could say, so we say it's red. And we use our left hand. We could go, but if we're going to get any more complex, that's going to get confusing. Where if we go here, S-T-O-P, so if we wanted to put two words in, I probably should come up with a more, a less time-specific reference, but I don't care right now. I'll cut it later. So we draw the containing shape, indicate where the word's going to be placed with your passive hand, and then spell the word with your active hand. And on step two, generally speaking, we're going to raise our eyebrows because we're saying, okay, you're paying attention. No, this is going to be where it is. I finger spelled it. Got it? Good. And then you can move on. So, some simple things. Diamond. Up above it is a 7. So we've just drawn it. You don't want to drop this. You want to keep it up there. So now here's the bottom of the diamond, and right up in the middle, someone needs to turn their ringer off. And now that's a little bit more complex. So you can do those layers. It's until you're used to drawing in the air and using that as a specific reference point, it's going to feel weird. I'm trying to think of what would be another way of doing it. Bookshelves. If I've got right in front of me, I'm not going to flip it around because this place is a mess, a 4x4 bookshelf, those little cubes. So you could say, here, and there's levels, right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, or so we're using this as reference points, and we set it, and then we don't want to stretch it. So we want to think of, okay, this is the whole thing. Bum, 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 bum. Later on, probably in ASL 2, sometimes in ASL 1, I'll do Sudokus as a class. One person will stand up at the front of the room, and everybody else will give them instructions of where to put different numbers. So, you've got a grid, and it's, so here's your reference point, right? Bum, 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 bum. So it's 3 over and 2 down. So we're going to start to get more and more complex. So practice this with just simple things. Bookshelves is an easy one. It could even be if you're talking about where shops are. Okay, so here is the big store, and a couple streets closer is this. Oftentimes we'll do directions on a flat plane so that we can show the directions, but if you're illustrating something, it can be vertical. In ASL, we use these two planes for illustration, either vertical or horizontal. Layout of your yard. Houses here, garages here, driveways, So you're going to want to now start getting used to how to manipulate that space. Because once we set a scale, we stick to it. If something's here and I keep pointing to here, I'm always referencing that same thing. So practice these diamonds or any other shapes. The next set are more complicated. Right? So we've got square, or technically a rectangle, a quadrangle, right? Parallelogram. Then how would we show that there are letters in the middle? So we've just drawn this. We're now at the bottom in the center and right up above us. And you don't want to go like I drew this here, and then I point in the middle, no, because I went way over the top, right? So I have established a signer. I was going to say a deaf person, but anybody who uses sign language is immediately going to see that shape in the air floating in front of you. If you describe somebody with red hair and a big bushy beard and glasses, we're going to see that face right there as you reference it. So if you don't inherently do that, like if I do this, if you don't see the traces of that square, start trying to do that. Start trying to imagine that, okay, there's a shape. It will help also because, the difference between a square and a rectangle, you want to be able to see that difference. Eventually, it's going to become really important because sometimes how you sign, how you produce a sign, gives that information in it and incorporates that. The difference between a thick slice of pizza and a thin slice of pizza, you're going to need to pick that image up. Oftentimes facial expressions will help with that kind of comparison, but you still want to develop that skill visually. Because as hearing people, there are a lot of skills we don't develop visually. If you've ever played around with optical illusions, you know how easily we can get tricked, but at the same time, how much information we can process if we would only do it. Okay, so that was middle, A. I'm a bad example because of teaching and performing for so long, I use both hands interchangeably, so oftentimes I will forget my dominant hand. Boom, 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 boom. Next one. Next one over. So that one's two things to point out. But I mean, really, once you've drawn the shape, if you see it in front of you, then up above, and notice how we're starting to, like, facial expressions are starting to have, up above is a 3, down below is a 9. So our facial expressions are going to start to incorporate. And it'll feel weird, it'll feel unnatural at first. Your face may do things you're like, why are you doing that stuff? Just play with it. I'll correct you if you're wrong. All right, the next one, even more complicated. Pick one of the shapes to go first. The containing shape is usually the most important because it is defining the boundaries. So, shoom, shoom, and then boom. You can do a line. So, boom, boom. Because it's extending out. I mean, I suppose to do triangle, triangle, but that looks like it'd be 2 diamonds, right? So diamond, shunk. I like for lines, especially if they're complicated, is to do the line in between so that they can kind of see. It goes right across the middle. You can do this. I find the reference point is often very clear. Up here, 3. Down here, 4. So you don't want to go up here, 3, down here, 4. That's confusing. It's much more clear if you point here and the 3 is right beside it. Point here and the 4 is right there. You can sort of replace it if you want, but I think that's more confusing. 3, 4, 3, 4. If we got rid of the diamond, 3, 4, or 3, 4. When we talk about fractions later, we assume the line's there, especially if we're talking about, like, how many cups of water? 3/4. So we assume there's a line there, because that's the pattern of the number. All right, next one, we have a star. I'm coming off the camera on this side. Okay. Inside, triangle. Inside of that, 8. So watch how my physicality changes. My non-manuals, I draw the star, big. Inside, slightly smaller, triangle. And inside that is an 8. Face is big for the star, kind of like a ho-hum, everyday kind of normal average for the triangle, and then tiny for the 8. We'll talk about sizes later, but in ASL there are 3 different sizes of facial expressions. There is the large, big, hungry, big, enormous facial expressions. The other end of the spectrum are their tiny things. And it's this little lemony face. I squinted, ordered a coffee, and small, wonder bigger. And then in the middle is the kind of to be expected face. I tend to call it a De Niro face. If you know Robert De Niro, it's kind of so you've got the 3 bears, and there's the Papa Bear who's big. You've got the baby bear who's small, and then you've got the Mama Bear who's kind of average, right? Middle, I suppose, average. What Mama Bear is average. No. So you've got those 3 sizes. So you could say, if you go, that's a big heart. Even if it's small, it's like, oh, but that was a mouse and it had a heart that was like this big. There's sweet. Oh, yeah, that's good enough. I don't have to belabor that. We'll talk about that more later. Last one. And up above. And notice how we've got 2 reference points, right? So we've drawn the shape. We leave this here, and as I bring my passive hand up to point to above, this is still giving me the reference at the bottom of the shape. So we don't ever let it drop. We'll just relocate the hand to do something else. Too successful. All right, so quick review of the 5 parameters that I talked about in the intro video. There are 5 different pieces. This is worth memorizing now. It will help in your sign analysis later, and it's also a good talking point, especially if people tell you, that sign language stuff, it's just gesture. What's language in that? It's just English. It's not, because if you change any one of these 5, you change the meaning of the sign, often significantly. At some points, it's also the polar opposite meaning, just by flipping it. So we get the hand shape. And if you change the hand shape, it can change the meaning. So, for example, I showed you school. If you change it to institute, it's a new sign with an I. If you do with fists, it now means work. So changing the hand shape changes the sign. Next one is location. You could have it on the chin. You could have it on the forehead. The difference between mother and father is location. It's the same exact sign, bum, 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 or sometimes it's a one. So location. The movement, go, come, up, down, tell you, tell me. So the movement will change. Palm orientation, which way the hand is facing. Good is from the mouth, like blowing a kiss, and then the hand goes into the other hand. Good. And bad, it goes palm down. So the difference in good and bad. Oh, that's good, that's bad. Sometimes that hand is all the difference. And last one is non-manuals. How we play with our face. As I showed you, so those 3 can impact the meaning of a sign just by tweaking from one to another. We talked about questions, that we have two different types of questions. We have yes-no questions, and we have WH questions. The yes-no questions, you want a simple answer. Yes or no, that's it. So eyebrows go up. Huh? Do you know what I mean? Yes or no? If no, okay, then I'll talk about something else. But the eyebrows go up. WH questions, you want information. Eyebrows go down. Who are you? Why are you here? So eyebrows down, because you want info. So again, those are the 5 parameters. I guarantee you they'll be on the final exam. It's a go-to question for sign language teachers to put in a written section. So worth memorizing and knowing examples. As you note a new sign, take a look at what's the hand shape, what's the location or locations. Does the hand shape change? Does the location change? What's the movement? What is this palm orientation involved? Is the hand up? Is the hand down? Like we saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So palm forward, palm back. And non-manuals. Is the face doing something while you're signing it? For most WH question words, you want to practice the sign with the eyebrows down. Which, where, who, what. You always want to practice so that when you produce the sign, it will automatically give you the right facial expression. All right, so that's the parameters. And now, keep working on your finger spelling. Don't let a day go by, even on the weekends or a holiday, where you're not practicing finger spelling. It will be the bane of your existence. And no matter how far you progress in ASL, if you can't finger spell, they'll always see you as an ASL 1 student. So, M-O-E, yes, Naomi. You are right now at the point where you're still saying M-O-E, right? And you're thinking about it in between. The goal is to get to the point where you don't have to think about the letters, where you can say Mo, and this will come out. Some of these are tough. There's weird kind of putting the hands together in weird combinations. So it's good to practice them. Anna. And I'm just bouncing. You could do A-N-N-A. Fist letters, I find it's really easy to do like a pump it, bump, 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 like a heartbeat. A-N-N-A. A-N-N-E. And make sure your E is flat, compressed. There's no space, because that's an O, that's an E. And from the front, it's sometimes hard to tell. Don't do this. Don't do the little salamander hands. Right. Salamander's this. Old mime stuff. Okay. Keep it tight in. If you have long nails and it's causing you to bleed, don't squeeze so hard or trim your nails. I don't know. You'll notice the E-S-T-E-E. The double E at the end, you can slide it off to the side. E-S-T-E-E. Not huge. Don't go way off camera. It's hard because fingerspelling you tend to drift. And you want to keep it always on camera. All right, that's it for fingerspelling. Well, okay. Other drills, I probably mentioned these before, but just come up with combinations. The goal is to get your hand to be able to spell a syllable, one unit of sound. Like I say, sa, 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 so, say, or si, st, 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 st. When I was really focused on getting fingerspelling down, this was in grad school, what I did was I would literally go slowly between combinations and figure out what is the most efficient way of moving from one letter to the other. Because there are sometimes you'll see people go S-T, like S, big, like open up and find my way in. That gets confusing. What you want, S-A, S-O, S-E, S-T, is find the most efficient way, the simplest way for moving one to the other, the least amount of work. A-N, E-N, I-N, O-N. And sometimes that means letting your wrist drift a little. That's great. You also want to keep very relaxed. Breathe through this movement. Interpreters used to have real problems, still some do, with carpal tunnel, repetitive motion injuries, because they're so tense in finger spelling and numbers and stuff because they got to be so specific. And it really works to your detriment. You could be getting close to retirement and your wrists lock up because you're not being nice to them. So try not to, if you feel a lot of tension, try to figure out how you can alleviate that tension. Sometimes literally just turning your body to face your fist and then turning your fist a little into yourself will relieve that tension. Or pushing it out like this, you can feel the tension all the way up your arm. That's bad. And if you're doing that for long periods of time, like at work, it's going to be nasty. There's no new vocab in 109, and there were no videos of dialogue. So that's pretty much it for 109. So go back and practice shapes and locating things in shapes using that reference point. And then keep practicing your finger spelling. I'll also say keep practicing your numbers, but we're about to move on to some more letters and looking at some other groupings. And numbers will keep going. They're pretty easy. So don't let a day go by. Cool, that's 109.